everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, September 4th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. Well, I spent this past weekend in Atlanta, Georgia at DragonCon and had an awful lot of fun with my co-host on the other podcast I work on, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. So I apologize if I've been a little bit MIA. I've been working really hard and also prepping for school, which starts this week. But I'm posting this episode sort of on time. It's a little late in the day, but hey, it's on the right day. I consider that a win, and it's going to be a good one. I chat with Dr. Agustin Fuentes, and he wrote a brand new book called The Creative Spark: How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional. It's a lot of fun, but you know what? Before I dive into that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week, like I do every week. But it was kind of a special week this week. I got a lot of incredible support through the PayPal portal, which you can access at my website, carasantamaria.com. I got a lot of support. This is a way that you can kind of make a one-time payment to support the show. And this week, I really, really want to thank Richard Moan, Rob Schreck. I want to thank Christian Taylor, Troy, I think it's Troy Ayoy, Liam Cremona, especially. Oh my goodness, how incredibly thoughtful, both you and Rob Schreck, and really everybody else. Just incredible, incredible support that I got this week from you guys, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And then, of course, at the Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/talknerdy, where you can pledge ongoing support. I want to thank Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, Jeffrey Perez, Genji Keen, Charles Payette, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and last but certainly not least, Jeffrey Sewell. You guys are amazing, and you honestly are the reason that this podcast keeps going. And remember, there's other ways to support the show by rating and reviewing on iTunes or Podcast One. I don't know if you can rate on Stitcher or Google Play, but you should if you can. Any place where you download podcasts, sharing with your friends and family, and just really getting the word out. That's honestly the best way to support the show. What else, guys? What else? I don't know. There's a lot going on, and I'm excited about it. You know what? I've been really lucky that over the past few months, I have had a lot of great interviews with a lot of great guests, and I've been able to do a bunch of them ahead of time, which helps me when my schedule gets crazy and I'm traveling a lot. And Dr. Fuentes is one of those interviews. So I want to tell you a little bit about him before we dive in. He is a professor and the chair of Notre Dame's Department of Anthropology. He is actually a primatologist and a biological anthropologist. He's also a National Geographic explorer. And he wrote another book called Race, Monogamy, and the Other Lies They Told You, which won the W. Howells Book Award. His new book, The Creative Spark: How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional, is available now, and there's a link to it in my show notes. So, guys, without any further ado, here he is, Dr. Agustin Fuentes. Well, Augustine, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And what a fabulous book that you have recently written, The Creative Spark: How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional. I feel like this is one of those kind of philosophical, ethical, biological questions of the ages, right? What makes us different? How are we similar? Are we really somehow better than, different than? You know, there are all these lines in the sand drawn between humans and non-human animals. I'm really excited to dive into all the aspects of this.
Yeah, so am I. That's why I write the book.
Absolutely.
I think it's one of the most amazing things to recognize how we're part of the world and yet how we play such a major part in shaping the world and ourselves. I think understanding human evolution and understanding what we can and cannot do is critical, especially right now.
And so tell me a little bit about your background. I mean, is it anthropology? Is it kind of one of those multi or interdisciplinary types of anthropology degrees where you've studied psychology, where you've studied philosophy? I mean, what made you want to really tackle these big questions?
Well, I did my undergraduate degrees in zoology and anthropology, right? So I like everything human plus all the other species we hang out with. And really that deep kind of natural history where you get in there and You watch the world, you watch people, you watch other animals, and you try to figure out what the ecology is. How does everything work? How is everything interconnected? And of course, if that's your interest, right, that's a big picture anthropology. But at the same time, I'm really interested in stuff like physiology, like, how the pulmonary system works, how blood and muscle works, how hormones work. And if you tie all that together with stuff like the past, right, digging fossils out of the ground and doing archaeological work, you start to see the world in a really different way. It's all about interconnections. It's all about complexity, but there's some straightforward, really important answers that emerge. And that's why I wrote this book.
It's just fascinating because it's true. We talk about sort of the butterfly effect, or we talk about this massive ecological niche, which is actually the Earth, right? It's kind of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
biggest ecological niche, and how one thing changes, and so many other almost impossible to predict things will change alongside it. But there are obviously major players and minor
Right.
players in that dance, and you can't deny that human beings, who in many ways have kind of trumped, not to use that word in vain,
Yeah, I know. It's ruined the
yeah,
whole word for me.
right, but yeah, how human beings have sort of moved beyond some of the, I don't know, the thresholds that many non-human species have. We've, created tools that have a much larger effect than
Yeah.
any one person could have. And, we create structures, and we have technology and poetry and art and religion and all of these things. And some animals have their versions of that, but there is kind of no denying that there is something different
Yeah,
about
yeah,
us.
yeah. And that difference is what's really critical. So this, in the broader picture of the world of evolutionary processes, similarities are really important, right?
Mhm.
Understanding how we're connected to the rest of the world. Why, I'm staring here looking at my dog who's sitting right next to me. She stares up at me. I get a little rush of oxytocin and, a cuddle. And
Mhm.
our limbic systems work with one another. We're both mammals, we're both social mammals. Those kinds of similarities are really important. But at the same time, each species is distinct, and it's what makes you distinct in these evolutionary sort of branching and splittings that I'm really interested in. And humans, you got to admit, are really distinctive. And so understanding what those patterns are, I think, is important, not just for humans, but for all the other species as well, because as you pointed out, we've ratcheted up our impact on the globe more than anything. So understanding how and why we do that is critical, not just for humans, but for the whole planet.
Absolutely. And I feel like there are, these sort of thought experiments that, if you take a more ethical, philosophical viewpoint of ecology, biology, zoology, comparative anatomy, all that good stuff,
Uh-huh.
these questions start to emerge. I think a very basic one, but one that encompasses probably a lot of what you're getting at here in your writings, is the question of animal research. So I
Yeah.
myself have done tons of animal research. I advocate for it. I'm very pro science in a staunch kind of way. Yet even I have lines in the sand.
Yeah.
People who are 100% against animal research, oftentimes if you really start to dig deep and you say, "Well, are you comfortable with Drosophila research, fruit fly research?" And they're like, "Well, yeah, of course." Well, that's an animal, It's just, where is your line in the sand? I'm not comfortable with invasive chimpanzee, or even, I should say, ape research. I'm
Uh-huh.
comfortable with behavioral ape research when it follows ethical guidelines, but we were one of the last countries other than Gabon in Africa to
Right.
do
Right.
invasive ape research. That for me might be a line, or maybe dolphins, maybe elephants, I'm not sure. But research on mice, on birds, on even cats and dogs, like, I think that there are, where is that line for me? It might be different than for you, but
Yeah.
even it'll be different than for somebody who's in PETA.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, this whole conversation is really important, and it tells us a lot about what it means to be human. But you pointed it out right at the beginning of that segment there. Ethics, right? This is where
Mhm.
philosophy, the humanities, and deep reflection have to be a part of science. The world isn't divided up into science and humanities and the arts and things like
Yeah.
that. The world is out there. We divide it up into artificial ways. But back to the point, I think understanding why ethics are important and how we construct our ethics and being clear about that is really important. We create them. That's part of our creative capacity. And our ability to be compassionate is unbelievable. But then again, so is our ability to be really, really cruel. And I think animal research or things like factory farms are a good example of how we can take this creativity all the way to some really dark final points.
Oh, absolutely. Or, weapons of mass destruction,
Right,
any of
right.
these. Yeah, just kind of the ability to innovate in every area oftentimes can run amok. And
Well, this,
and
yeah, this is what people don't understand because I'm frequently arguing. A lot of my work is about the evolution of cooperation and compassion and working
mhm.
together. And people are like, "Oh, you're just a lefty sort of peacenik. You want the world to be all good and everything." And I try to point out, no, you don't understand. I'm talking about natural history,
Yeah.
behavior, biology, ecology. So when I say cooperation, I don't mean when I say our ancestors cooperated a lot in the past, I don't mean they ran through the daisies holding hands and singing, right? Maybe they did sometimes, but to do warfare, one of the most horrendous things humans have invented, you need unbelievable cooperation. The best cooperators are the ones who win wars, not the most aggressive individuals. And
Oh,
so
that's
I think
interesting.
people
And it's
people
true.
don't put it together. That I'm not arguing that cooperation is good and conflict is bad. They're both the same thing, and it's our
Mhm.
amazing ability to do both of them in unbelievably creative and imaginative ways that makes us distinctive.
Yeah, and it's funny because sometimes when you start to slice and dice human behavior, and that's really how you start your book a little bit, is talking about early hominins, talking about some of these primate species that we sort of evolved from, these common ancestors, and now that we have these cousins that we
Yeah.
exist with. Um, when you really start to slice and dice it, you do see things that aren't that special. But again, it's
Hmm.
sort of like, I don't know, rate limiting factors, thresholds,
Yeah.
bottlenecks. I'm not really sure how to define it, but what made it so that when a chimpanzee makes a tool or a bonobo makes a tool to help them reach food or to share food or to break out of their enclosure, we were able to make those tools and then it just exploded into having the internet, for example.
Right, right, right.
Where
That's what I always
where
tell
where's
people.
that difference?
Well, I show people these old Oldowan tools, 2 million-year-old chipped rock, and no
Mhm.
one's really ever impressed. They should be, because that same tech capacity to build those tools is what allowed us to land humans on the moon and to build this amazing iPhone, which is sitting in my lap, which has more power, probably, I think, computing power than all of NASA at the time they landed someone on the moon. What is it? It's humans' capacity to ratchet up, to cooperate, to share, and to learn. Chimpanzees are incredible tool users and makers. They have incredibly complex cultures. They're really fascinating. But one chimpanzee can't work with another in a long term cooperative relationship where they exchange really dense information and show and craft and teach one another how to do very complicated things.
Mm.
They can do basic, simple things. But it takes, chimpanzees use these rocks to crack nuts in some communities.
Yeah.
It takes them months, if not years, to learn how to do that.
Yeah, and often it's almost like modeled for them. Like they can learn it
Right,
very quickly if somebody else within the society teaches them or a
right.
researcher teaches them, but to naturally develop tool use from just things that they find in their environment, that is a long process, right? And it was long
It,
for us too. It
yeah,
just happened to happen a long time ago.
right, right. Well, 2 million years, and chimps have been using tools for a very, very long time. But chimps
Mm.
can't ratchet up. They can't take a rock and a stick and a shell and sort of imagine. Here's the reality: I have a rock, a stick, and a shell. They try to figure out what they can do with that rock, stick, and the shell. A human can look at the rock, stick, and the shell and imagine a fourth or a fifth composite tool, something melded together, something changed, something that's not even right in front of him or her, but using those materials created. And that is our real capacity, the ability to see the world as it is and to imagine what might be and to try to make it so.
And I always get so excited when I think about the dead ends because we talk about
Mm,
ourselves like, yes, we are very special just because we're the ones who happen to
right,
persist. But
right,
obviously, Neanderthal, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, even Australopithecus, some of these early
right.
hominin kind of ancestors had some of these incredible capabilities. If Neanderthal hadn't for whatever reason, and I know anthropologists are trying to track that down, but it does seem like humans had something to do with it. If they hadn't met their demise and they were still persisting today, it would be so interesting to see that there is potentially another species with very similar capacities.
Yeah, and the big debate is, are they really another species,
Oh, yeah.
right? What do we have out there right now? At let's say at 50,000, 100,000 years ago, we have lots of populations of things in our genus, right? Genus Homo.
Mhm.
They might be different species, they might not be, but one thing is for sure, they could interbreed, and they did,
Yeah, and
and
we
that
have
is
them
really
in
cool. Yeah,
us.
yeah, and we have them in us, and every year we see more. And so that begs the question, what exactly happened, right? The old traditional model is humans show up, move around the world, and outcompete or wipe out or drive to
Mhm.
extinction every other human like thing. I'm not sure the data really support that now. Something more complicated is going on. Because if you look at Neanderthals, Neanderthal populations, they made jewelry, they wore feathers, they built structures inside of caves. I mean, they did everything that we consider modern human behavior.
Absolutely.
So, how different were they? And I think that's a good question. Genetically, they're different, but there are so many populations around in the last couple 100,000 years. Almost every one of them went extinct. We didn't. We're very
Mhm.
lucky.
Yeah, we are. And I think that's such an important and sort of a humble way to look at it. We are lucky. We
Oh,
really
yeah.
don't know, and we may never know exactly why we persisted and they did
Yeah.
not.
I think we
Um,
know the general category, right? This is my
mhm.
pitch. It's this cooperative creativity, this incredible capacity to imagine and to work together to make things into reality. That's what is our sort of winning process. But a lot of other things had that process. We just happened to be the branch that made it. But even so, I mean, what we just said, the genes, right, the sort of DNA remnants of these other populations are part of us. So one could say it's not like they completely went extinct. They may be hybridized and mixed and matched.
Mhm.
Maybe humans of today are more of a, it's like a mutt of the hominin lineage, and maybe that's part of what made us succeed.
Yeah, maybe it's because we took the best features of all of these other organizations to improve our fitness, you know?
Yeah,
It's impossible to really know because if you've done a 23andMe or a Nat Geo Genographic project, there's a lot of different
right.
ones on the market, you'll see the percentage of Neanderthal in your DNA. You'll see the percentage of even what are they, Denisovans in your
Yeah,
DNA, and it's so cool to know that we have this very ancient and extinct genetic profile. And of
yeah,
course, if you really think about it, duh, we have that
right.
because we
Yeah, of
all
course.
evolved from from the primordial soup. Um,
I think there's something really interesting. So if you'll let me rant for a
of
second on
course.
23andMe, because I think this is, you just brought up something that I think is really important. So you order your 23andMe and you
Mhm.
get it back, and we don't have time to go into it, but there's a whole bunch of problems with the sort of how you talk about genetics, right? And
Yeah.
what are your sample populations and what are you actually measuring? Let's set that aside for a moment and dive into this Neanderthal thing. They make a giant thing. Like they told me, you are almost 3% Neanderthal or something like that. But what they never tell you is that they're only measuring 0.1% of your genome.
Huh.
The 99.9% is basically shared amongst all living humans. So they're measuring that 0.1%. And what they don't tell you when they make a big deal and they say 4% of your unique variation is relative to Neanderthals, what they don't say is that 99% of your genome is African.
Yeah. Ah,
So,
it's
so
true.
think
You're
about
only
that.
talking about what happened within the past, like maybe 150,000 years.
Or even less, because they're ignoring a huge amount of non-variant sites, right? So they're
Hmm.
just saying we're only interested in the stuff that lets us identify some sort of population movement. We're actually not
Yeah.
interested in the stuff that actually does things.
When was that first migration out of the
So,
kind of seat of humanity?
well, here's the big debate, right?
Mhm.
We know that our genus shows up in Africa probably between, let's say, right now, the best guess is about between 2.5 and 3 million years ago.
Yeah.
Things that people are going to say, okay, this is probably our genus. And
And by
then
genus, you mean Homo something.
Homo. I
Yeah.
mean, Homo something, yeah.
Yeah.
And by about 1.8 million years ago, we're in Eurasia and down into Southeast Asia. When I say we, our genus, our ancestors.
Oh, so
And
we were
from,
long before we were human, as in
right,
Homo sapiens. We were
right,
moving around.
right. And what the
Yeah.
thing is, everyone has this misrep. They always think, oh, well, they left Africa in multiple waves. But the thing is, once humans started moving at about 1.8 million years ago, they
Mhm.
kept moving. They
Yeah.
moved out, they moved back, they moved around. That's what the DNA shows us, right? These
Mhm.
patterns of movement. And a lot of humans or human like things moved out and spread around the world. Absolutely, the vast majority went extinct. But
Mhm.
some didn't. And those that didn't are the ones that contributed to our current genetic makeup.
Ugh, it's so cool to think about the long and storied past of who we are and kind of this, I don't know, what I consider sort of an immortal thread. You know,
Yeah,
these, it's actually physical stuff, physical matter that was in the germline cells of your parents, that was in the
right.
germline cells of their parents. And you can go back to when we had flippers. Like you can
Yeah,
go back so far. And
right.
that's why when you see that, you know, X% of your DNA is conserved with a banana or
Right,
something, like
right,
we
right.
really are connected to every
Yeah,
living thing on the planet. And that's why it's so, I hate to go political or even like it shouldn't even be a political conversation, but that's why it's so frustrating and like it saddens me to my core when I see people who refuse to admit this central tenet of modern science,
right,
which is
right.
that we are genetically connected and we did evolve over millions and millions of
Right,
years.
right, right. And that has an ethical impact. That
Yeah.
means we are part of the world. And because we have the capacity and have developed the tools to manipulate the world, it is our ethical responsibility to treat it well for us and for others. That's a deep philosophical and biological reality. And I think people don't get that. And you're right, it is very frustrating. This is
Mhm.
why I just wrote a piece for Huffington Post recently, really pushing people, especially scientists, to be more active than ever because current
Mhm.
governments around the world, including and especially ours, is trying to suppress climate science, ecology, and other types of scientific data through this kind of enforced ignorance or trying to get people away from science. And that is dangerous. The way to control a population is to have them be ignorant and uneducated.
Absolutely. And the truth is, through good science communication, through improved science literacy, there are obvious examples that I think touch on individuals and they don't really require the depth of science knowledge to open that door. Because
Yeah,
think about somebody who's maybe ultra conservative. And again, I don't think that these are the, you know, mustache twisting, conspirators, but an individual, you know, not a lobbyist and not somebody who's like in a think tank working with the Koch brothers, but an
right,
individual person who's like, yeah, I don't really buy this whole evolution thing. I'm just very religious and it seems to fly in the face of my core beliefs. And this idea of shepherding, like you mentioned, we're all
yeah,
connected, so we really have to shepherd this planet, and the decisions that we make ultimately impact ecology's connected. Like you just
right,
can't argue with that. But you see an individual like that and they have a dog. You have a dog, I have a
right,
dog. We love our
right,
dogs. My super religious father has a dog, and he understands at his core in a very ethical and moral place that he has an obligation to that dog to take care of it because that dog depends on him.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that
yeah.
that's a microcosm of exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's that amazing capacity to relate to others.
Mhm.
Humans have incredible, very evolutionarily deep roots for compassion, for caring, and for cooperation. Now, again, don't get me wrong, those same roots for caring so much for those that mean a lot to you can allow you to dehumanize and be unbelievably cruel and vicious to those who don't care about. But
Mhm.
let's not go there yet. This idea of compassion is really incredible because that's part of our success too. The whole idea of cooperative parenting, of really, really investing your physical, emotional, and psychological energy in others of your community, that is a powerful toolkit for humans. And if you add on to that this creativity, you then are not just talking about individuals striving to make it in the world. Really, humans work as communities.
Yeah, and you know, that I think that's always going to be the case as much as some of us in like modern western cultures almost try to push against it, but it
Yeah.
is interesting to see that with progress, with further evolution and with modernization and industrialization, certain what we think of as the most progressive nations, right? The most innovative nations actually do tend to move towards a non-cooperative viewpoint and a more individualistic society. You know, you see these more
Well,
conserved social things in I don't know, what we think of as non-Western societies.
Well,
It makes me
but I mean, it
wonder
it depends though how you sort of think about that,
and how
right?
you
So I
define
think
it.
we oversimplify cooperation and community. So, for example, Europe has tons of problems, but there is a kind of communitarian ethos, right?
Mhm.
And they're definitely Western. But something that strikes me as fascinating is you go to a lot of European capitals, right? Big cities. They are through and through with plazas,
Yeah.
open spaces, parks, gathering places. You look at a lot of the newer American cities, and it's really hard to find a place aside from a site of consumption, like a mall or something, where
Yep.
people can gather. And so it's simple things like that. Is communal space something that's treasured or not, right? In a lot of the US, we're isolated in our houses, where in other places people get out. And that's still the case for like older cities in the US. But I think the design towards the individual, that can be problematic. And I think you're right that sort of people are confusing modern and, let's say, advanced with
Yeah.
sort of this notion of individuality. And I'm not sure the two go together as well as people think.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if that is a byproduct of some other force at play or if this is kind of an eventuality for human beings. I don't think so, simply because there are many developed nations that still really treasure the idea of raising kids communally, the
Yeah,
idea of like when your elderly parents can't support themselves anymore, they come and
right,
live at home and they help you
right.
raise your children. And I do see cultures within the states doing the same thing, but often they are immigrant cultures.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something really interesting here, and let's just get pull back a little bit to the
Mhm.
biology, because core to human or to primate biological patterns is the social group, right? Most
Absolutely.
primates rely extensively on having others of the same species around them all the time and interacting with them. And they need that as part of the way in which they interact. Humans take that a step further with this thing that people like Michael Tomasello and others call shared intentionality, or that Robin Dunbar has called sort of the social brain, that we don't even just think by ourselves. We need other people to think with, to
Huh.
feel with, to create with, and to imagine with. We offload so much of our information. Humans are so excellent at doing stuff because we don't have to have all the information needed just ourselves. We can draw on others. So I would say biologically, evolutionarily, psychologically, and socially, being in a community, being in a social group is what humans do. And we can try to mess that up, but we're always going to come back to it or
Yeah,
go extinct.
I would agree with that. And the funny thing is, sometimes it really is about perspective shifting because if you look at sort of the younger generation, these digital native generations who
Uh-huh.
never knew life without the internet, you might say, oh, but they're so isolated and they're not interacting with peer groups as often. But their world has become this global digital world,
Right.
and they're almost more social than our grandparents were because they have much wider nets that they're connecting with. They're just not doing it in a traditional way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's fascinating. Sorry, my attention just veered for a second. There's a squirrel downstairs, and my dog is that deep drive to predate.
I
No, no,
know
no.
that drive. Yeah,
We're,
my
we're,
dog has wandered off. He's, like, apparently bored by me right now. He's probably staring out the window at a squirrel as we speak. Y
no, but this I think is it's a good point, because this,
mm.
if we think about this dog, my dog Shelly's sort of drive to chase these little rodent-like squirrel things, that's in her. That's part of her. I would say for humans, part of our drive, that kind of sort of developed, evolved processes, are these social, connected, collaborative processes. That's what we do. That's our
Yeah.
squirrel chasing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to see because I think what we often will read about your perspective in this book, although you obviously include a conversation and you go back to this place where understanding how we're similar
Yeah.
is incredibly enlightening, but the subtitle of the book, The Creative Spark, How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional. I'm wondering if you get flack from any sort of communities, or if people box your viewpoint in as sort of dichotomous to, I don't know, a Franz de Waal who
Yeah.
loves to write about, what's conserved between ourselves and our ape relatives. When obviously, I think when it comes down to it, the perspectives really they're similar. It's just
Right.
framing the argument differently.
Right, exactly. So evolution is about continuities and discontinuities. The
Mhm.
branching, the stuff that Darwin was really, turned on by, those are discontinuities. Those are
Mhm.
breaks. And so it's the change on those branches that I'm really interested in. Now, Franz de Waal's work is great. He points out the deep, deep, deep similarities between us and the other primates and the social mammals. And I do too. Actually, I talk a lot about it in the
Yeah.
book. But if we're really not asking about chimps or dogs or orcas, but we're asking about humans, we got to ask what's distinctive, what changed along these patterns, acknowledging always all the similarities, but what changed, what makes us distinctive, what makes us exceptional is really interesting when the question is about the human. And I get flack because people are saying, oh,
Yeah.
you're saying humans are better. Nothing says exceptional doesn't mean better than something else. Humans are exceptional in the way that we imagine, that we create, that we cooperate. Those are biological and behavioral data that support that. I'm not saying that chimps, by saying humans are great and fascinating, I'm not saying chimps aren't or hyenas aren't. They are.
Exactly.
But but I'm talking about humans. And so there's this kind of thing where people don't want to recognize it's like that cooperation and conflict thing. Everyone wants dualistic notions that's either
Mhm.
or, black or white, one or the other. Like, the world is gray and green and yellow. It's not black and white.
And the best way to really start to tease apart some of these data that really point to the exceptionality of individual species is to kind of start at a comparative position. So
Hmm.
I think it's so cool. Obviously, we go back to chimps a lot because they are just evolutionarily the closest thing extant species.
Right.
Chimps and bonobos, probably the
Yeah.
closest extant species that we can compare to. But there are species like, okay, so non-mammalian species like corvids, for example,
Yeah.
where we
Oh,
see
yeah.
amazing similarities, and then even non vertebrate species like octopuses. They
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
insane, where you're like, holy crap, how could what we think of as a quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, a low level or a,
Yeah.
like we
Oh,
use these terms in biology, which I don't think are really as descriptive. Like, it's evolutionarily not as sophisticated. However,
yeah.
people end up, but they're such sophisticated. And then when you talk about the similarities, you can start to tease out, oh, but the way that that organism mourns their dead, for example, is
Right.
a much different situation than how we mourn our dead.
Yeah, and I think really recognizing that, recognizing the rich, the plethora of
Hmm.
amazing things, beings, creatures, organisms, persons in the world, I think gets us a little bit further along what we started this whole conversation with, this sort of ethics of understanding. And I
Yeah,
think octopuses are a great, although I wish it was octopi. I think
I
that sounds
know.
better.
Or
But
octopodes. I think
right,
some people say
octopodes, that
that.
would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are just, I mean, I love them. They're amazing and they taste great. So
Mhm.
they are, I am constantly blown away by their capacity for innovation and manipulation.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
absolutely incredible. So I don't think talking about humans and our incredible creativity and exceptional cognitive processes takes anything away from an octopus, right? It's just people trying to say it's humans versus nature. That's the problem. It's never humans outside of nature. We're part of nature. We're just a really big part of it. And I think people need to understand that. And that's why the history is important, right? That's why I spend, however many pages running through the last 2 million years just to give us a grounding and even talking about other primates and other mammals. But then trying to come up to the last 10,000 years and then the more recent time just to ground why that deep history is meaningful, but also to remind everyone how different things are right now and that we got to take that into account as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. This historical perspective is so incredibly important for perspective, for,
Right.
really understanding our place in this vast web that we often can forget about because it's very easy to close the doors and close the windows and close the shades. And if there's a spider in my house, oh my God, how did it get in here? When it's like, you built a house on top of where spiders live, deal with it.
Right. Right.
And so, it's very easy for us to have this sort of austere, sterile view. Like I have my own little concrete piece of the pie and I'm somehow separate from it. But the
Right.
more you're right that you learn about the historical nature of nature, um, and even kind of extending that to our place in the cosmos. A lot of cosmologists do a beautiful job of talking about these things that we think of as being quite esoteric, but really they're fundamental
Yeah.
to the human condition. But it's happening right here on our home planet and has been for millions of years.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I obviously I think anybody who is fundamentally interested in improving their literacy, not just in the sciences, knows how important historical perspective is
Yeah.
for being
Yeah.
well-rounded and yeah, for having a quality outlook.
Yeah, understanding history is everything. And it doesn't matter what you believe. That is, I don't care if someone believes in gravity or evolution because they
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So understanding why they happen is the important part. I hate the debate now about, well, what does someone believe? That's not important. What's important is, do you understand how processes work? And history is critical to that. But let me back up really quickly to go back
Mhm.
to the spider in the house. People freak out, try to cut out spiders and try to cut out nature. What I
Yeah.
think really would freak people out, and this is why I love biology, and it's just so awesome, is that, hey, you have billions of critters living in and around you right now. If you were to take away all of the things that had human DNA from your body, you still have about a 65, 70% outline of your body from all
Yeah.
the other critters. So get over it. The spider, welcome the spider. We're part of a big mess. There's recent work calling humans or calling organisms holobions as instead of individuals, because really
Mhm.
we are a composite being of hundreds of thousands of species walking around.
Absolutely. It's always a continuum, right? Like we can look at intense examples of that, like colonial organisms, or,
Hmm.
there's certain types of jellyfish that sort of just evolve from all these individual organisms working together. Even ourselves, if you look at these evolutionarily old portions, like we're eukaryotes, so we have certain
Right.
components of ourselves that were just engulfed old bacteria. And then you can go to the extreme other end where you're like, okay, a person is a person. I can distinguish between one person and two people. That's easy to do. But you're right. If you start to look down at a lower level, not even the molecular level, just the
No.
cellular level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's not just that they're like legit living in our eyelashes and shit, but they're
Right.
also we have a cloud around us at all
Right.
times. Like
Right.
it's amazing to think about.
But it's, I mean, I know it can freak people out, but again, back to this notion of ecosystems and ecology. It's all
Mhm.
connected. It's always all connected and it's always complicated, but that doesn't mean there's not really cool, pretty straightforward ways to talk about it and to understand it.
And it's hugely improving people's lives, like their actual well being, to start to become informed about these things. I can't tell you how many individuals probably finally have answers about why they've had horrible digestive problems
Yeah.
their entire lives
Yeah.
because we're starting to learn more about all the things that live inside of our
Right.
digestive tract
Right.
and figure out, is there something wrong with all those things that live
Right.
inside your digestive tract? I mean, that's just the case ever since the germ theory of disease became well established. The lifespan, exponentially improved.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, there's so many cool things with that. I travel a lot. I travel way too much, probably.
Hmm.
But I have a ongoing sort of political negotiations with all of my gut microbiota. Right. I tell them, okay, guys, we're going to the other side of the planet. Here's the deal. You treat me right, I'll treat you as nicely as I possibly can. Give me a couple days to get settled in, and I'll make sure you get the good stuff. The good stuff. And
Yeah.
it works. We have a kind of détente. We have an agreement.
I like it. Yeah, they're like, dose me with the water slowly. Like, don't just drink a gallon of local water when you go to a new country right away. We don't like that. That's so great. Yeah, I mean, it's really, again, it's perspective and it's just having that nugget of knowledge. There's not, I don't have the expectation as a science communicator that every individual have a PhD in biology, or even have
Right.
a
God, we wouldn't want that.
no, it would, oh my God, it would be unbearable to have conversations at cocktail parties. But even a basic, a collegiate level, even a high school
Yeah.
level basic understanding. And that's the frustrating part. Most people went to high school, but why is it that they can't remember what DNA is?
Yeah.
Where is
Yeah.
that disconnect? And why aren't we seeing? We are. I mean, we are seeing incredible books like yours. We're seeing incredible programming, and it's getting better and better, I think. But there is still I don't know, a sort of bias, at least in American society. And of course,
Yeah.
you are not. Are you first generation?
Yeah. I was born. Yeah. For I
You were
was
born. Okay.
born here. Yeah. But
Yeah.
first
Yeah. Yeah.
generation in the U.S. Yeah.
But your family is obviously not
Well,
American
my
born.
my father's actually from Spain,
Okay.
but my mother was from New York, so
Oh, gotcha.
she was second generation U.S.
Was she also Spanish? Is that why you have such
No,
a
she
strong
actually
name?
her family came from Eastern Europe.
Oh, okay, cool. So they just kind of wanted to keep the familial vibe
Yeah.
with having such a strong Spanish name.
Yeah.
And so I have the same thing. My father's second generation. He was Italian, but he's been here. My grandfather was born in Italy, and then my
Hmm.
mother was born in Puerto Rico.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, and I think that I see that in other cultures and in other countries, their programming, um, although they don't quite have I don't know, the breadth
Hmm.
and the options that we have with American TV, which in many ways is the standard bearer for the world.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a fear in American programming that we don't want to be over the heads of the general public,
Right.
which does
Right.
them a huge disservice. And I
Yeah.
see
I.
European
Yeah.
nations, Canadian nations, the Canadian nation, I think really outdoing us
Oh, yeah.
in that respect.
But I mean, the U.S. entertainment industry is driven by profits and fear. And,
Hmm.
I don't mind infotainment at all and entertainment. I love it. But man, we are missing so many great opportunities to do really good shows. I think humans, the American public in general, are really much more capable of understanding stuff than TV and movie executives give them credit for.
Oh,
I think people
absolutely.
really dig complex, interesting things. You just have to make it accessible and engaging. And I don't think that's that difficult. It's just that that's not what makes money right now, and they're afraid. People are afraid to try something new or to try something old.
Oh yeah, for sure. Have you? Am I misremembering that you actually did some work as a National Geographic explorer?
Yeah, no. I've worked with National Geographic quite a bit. I love National Geographic. It's
Me
such an
too.
amazing organization. The last big project that I did with them was with the folks who do the critter cam, put the cameras on different animals. So we,
Awesome.
we custom developed and designed critter cams for monkeys. And so we worked with some monkeys, collaborated with them to have them collect data for us on each other by wearing HD cameras around their necks. It's amazing footage. We still haven't quite figured out what to do with it yet, but as a research tool, it's really incredible. The problem is the cost, but we'll
Yeah.
figure that out one way or another.
Yeah. Oh, it's so incredible. And I really do think that National Geographic in many ways is kind of a last bastion here.
Yeah,
There are other organizations that I think are doing good work. Obviously, I've worked with a lot of different science outlets and even mainstream outlets that in small ways are doing incredible science work. But as a whole, we could really learn a lot from some of these other countries that I think have
yeah.
a long history. England especially, but
Yeah,
also Canada
BBC does
and yeah.
amazing stuff, and the
Just
CBC, the Canadian too. But I think your point, what you do and what other good science communicators do is critical because knowledge is power. I know that's a trite saying, but it's real.
mhm.
It's accurate, and if people have a better understanding of the world and the information in it, we're in a better shape. The more educated the public, the better chances we have for social justice, for reducing inequality, for making people's lives better. I mean, study after study after study after study shows that education and improvement in quality of life for a population go hand in hand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, it opens so many things up. It's not just about work, it's about enjoying poetry in a deeper way,
Yeah.
enjoying music in a deeper way. All of these things, circling back to your book, that really, in many ways, set us apart.
Yeah.
If we're not fully indulging in those things and taking them to their most extremes, I feel like we're doing ourselves as a species a disservice.
I agree totally. In fact, that's sort of how I end the book by saying,
Mm
go out and create. Why does every kid loves to do some painting or drawing or
hmm.
running around and pretending in the backyard or something like that? And then for some reason, all of that creativity, we suppress it or try to get rid of it as we become adults. That's ridiculous. That creativity is what got us here in the first place. Creativity, joy, and imagination is not just for kids, it's for everyone. And if we don't get back to sort of playing more, creating more, imagining more, we're going to be in bad shape. Look where it's got us right now.
Yeah. When we've been talking throughout this about what does make humans exceptional, this capacity for creative problem solving, this kind of fundamental innovative quality that we have, what are some of the categories, the descriptions, the actual tangible things that through your research you've realized are very unique to human beings?
So, one of the real critical things is the ability to conceptualize what I call imagining here, conceptualize solutions or outcomes to a particular problem, be it social, material, ecological, whatever. The ability to conceptualize or imagine these outcomes when there is nothing in what's in front of you that combines to that imagining. What I mean
So
by
like
that
to
is,
gestalt something like
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Like to
gotcha.
do so you've got a bunch of stuff in front of you or a particular social problem at work or in school or amongst your family, and everything that's in front of you isn't the answer. But you come up with something that's not in front of you to solve
Mhm.
that problem. That's a really amazing capacity. But humans, other organisms can do this now and then, but humans do it and then they share the information, right?
Mhm.
And it spreads, and we teach one another, and we learn. And so that capacity is it's due to the way in which our neural networks work. It's due to the way in which our physiologies work, our bodies and hormones, and it's due to our capacity for intense, rich, deep communication via this thing we call language. So you put all that together, right? And you have an amazing potential in humanity.
Language really was an important kind of rate limiting step for us, wasn't it?
Yep,
Like it
yep.
really exploded our capacity. And not just verbal language, although that was obviously incredibly important for thousands of years, but written language had
Yeah.
so much potential tied into it.
Well, people don't recognize. Everyone is making a big deal about, let's say, the appearance of the iPhone, and like, oh, it's revolutionized the world, it's changed
Yeah.
everything, changed communications, and that's true. The sort of smartphone does change a lot of things, but people don't realize that writing, right? Writing was the smartphone times 3 billion,
Mhm.
back in the day, and before that, art, different kinds of scratches on cave walls, different kinds of blemishes and ochre, right? This kind of red pigment that's used. Humans have hundreds of thousands of years of history of doing sort of what we call semiosis, right? Of making meaning in the world in ways that are novel, creating new images, new items, new ways to transmit information. Writing was really incredible. Imagery, to be able to like video, right? And
Mhm.
film, really amazing. And now VR, right? So with
Yeah.
artificial intelligence and virtual reality, we've yet again created ourselves into a whole new landscape of reality.
And the cool thing is that this isn't linear and this isn't
Mm-mm.
only a one-way street. There are these feedback mechanisms at play within our own brains where I guess you don't realize it until you really start to dig deep, but the way that we organize our thoughts, kind of the fundamental things about our theory of mind have actually been informed by our capacity to write. Like,
Absolutely. To write, to read, to think together. The
mhm.
anthropologist Tim Ingold has a great way of borrowing from these guys, Deleuze and Guattari. He has a great way of talking about humans. He says we are not human beings, but we're human becomings, right? And we
Mhm.
become our entire lives. And that's true neurobiologically and physiologically. Our bodies are constantly absorbing, moving, changing, mapping to what's around them, to what they're doing, to what they're interfacing with. So we are becoming always. And whether we are interfacing with, smartphone technology, an encyclopedia, or, watching a TV sitcom, all of that is shaping and reshaping the way in which we perceive the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated, and of course, I'm like woefully ignorant about some of these historical linguistic concepts where it's sort of like in linguistic anthropology, where these
Uh-huh.
individuals will try and break down how we utilize language and talk about our sort of evolution of mind throughout that process. Just looking at things like the propositions that we use. They
Yeah.
tend to be spatial in nature. Things are
Right.
above things and below things and next to things and beneath things. Even when we're not actually talking about spatial things, we use that as a stand in. And that must have had something to do with how we organize the world. It's so
Yeah.
cool to see
And
those kinds of little small evolutionary changes that occurred over
and
thousands of years.
what's really cool about that is different languages, right? Different cultures do that in different ways. So
Hmm.
the capacity is there, but how it pans out, whether it's horizontal, vertical, or whether it's diagonal, whether things are circular or with edges, those things change. Or think of languages, there are many languages that don't have gender pronouns,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
No, he or she, which is, like I speak Indonesian, and it takes a while to get used to recognizing there are many other ways you denote gender, but you don't do it by, saying she or he, and it's a different concept.
And it's
And
almost
you,
it's so much more progressive because we're struggling. We're on a precipice now with the English language where
oh
we're
yeah,
struggling with this. The other podcast I work on, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, we just finished the first draft of our first book, and we talked at length with the editor because, as a sort of person who's obsessive about grammar, I'm a very progressive person who wants to make sure that there's no intrinsic gender bias in my writing. And
uh-huh.
so, of course, I used to do the thing where it was like, when a person looks at
Oh
his or
god,
her
yeah,
reflection in the
yeah,
mirror, he or she thinks that blah, blah, and it's jargony. It's hard to
yeah,
read.
yeah,
Yet the
yeah,
appropriate thing now to do is to say they, but it drives me
yeah, yeah.
insane because
So
it's so grammatically incorrect.
yeah,
But
I don't
language
like it. I don't
evolves.
like it.
Yeah,
And
it's
I actually
hard.
I try to flip back and forth between he and she.
Yeah.
And so in the book, in the Creative Spark, I don't know if readers notice or not, but I explicitly put she in a lot of places where other authors put he.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important. Let me give you two examples. Stone tool making. Every single natural history museum that you walk into, every single movie you see, every single reconstruction or painting you see is going to have some caveman,
Yep.
male, kneeling down or standing up making tools. Okay, we have no data, none, zero to talk about that suggests any gender difference in stone tool production throughout our entire history.
No, not at all.
Zero.
And not just
None.
that,
Zero.
the most famous hominin fossil of all
Right.
time is a chick.
Right. Well,
Like
wait, no, no.
Lucy, we think was a woman, and
Right.
she
No,
has
no.
probably captured
Definitely.
all of our imaginations.
Lucy was a female, and the older one, Artie, was also a female. So, I mean,
Mhm.
and they always show when they show these like dioramas, moving together. There's always a male either hunting something or yeah, holding a dead animal,
Yeah.
standing up usually. A woman is either holding an infant or crouching or cooking.
Yeah,
And we're like,
always.
wait a minute, wait a minute. The data actually suggests much more complicated gender processes and patterns in the past. And
Well,
so
and looking at primate
that's,
culture, that
yeah.
suggests it as well.
So, and everyone loves to go to chimpanzees for comparisons, right? So it's like, oh, chimpanzees, they're the ones who are the good model for humans. And I don't think they are very good models, but that's aside. But if we're going to really do that, then who uses the tools the best in chimpanzees? Females.
That's
Who
awesome.
who hunts with tools? Spear hunting. Females. So
Yeah, why is that? And why is it that in Planet of the Apes, all the
oh,
major players are dudes?
don't. Okay, we don't. I tried to see the latest version of it last night, and you're 35 minutes into it, and there are like no females except for one
Yeah.
who gets killed right away.
Oh
And
no.
primate societies, the females are the central social sort of structures in primate societies. One subspecies of chimpanzee, the eastern chimpanzee, Pantroglodytes schweinfurthii, the ones that have been the most studied, those are the
Mhm.
most male centric. But even in those, the females play critical roles. So yeah, the apes movies really lost it for me. At least the old ones, had Zira, who was awesome and the central
Yeah.
player.
Yeah, why is it that, Caesar is a guy and all of the other ones around Caesar in the newer, I don't know how many there are now, because I really love the conception of them. I think it
Yeah,
touches on a lot of exactly what we've been talking about this whole
yeah.
time, but why does it have to be so gender biased? That's a huge bummer.
It is a real bummer, but it goes to show social control, fear, and patriarchy. I mean, this whole idea of like sort of here's what we assume: the warriors are male. The big ones that survive are male. A society is that they think of this old like apes or cavemen as men defending helpless women and children. Well, that's just BS, right? The
Yeah,
data
absolutely.
do not support that.
And even the
So
concepts that I think, kind of vibe with that bias, like, well, there's an alpha male. Well,
right,
why is he an alpha male? It's because
right,
he has the attention of the
right, right,
female.
right, 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 right.
And as
Yeah,
soon as they're not into him anymore, he is not the alpha anymore.
and that's actually a real standard pattern for a lot of social mammals.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's
that's
true.
never what we see. So I mean, that's another reason. Back to science education, it's one thing to have some little bit of science trickle out, but when it's
Mhm.
trickled out, filtered through this heavy gendered, cultural, stereotypy model, then it's almost damaging, right? And that's one of my problem with some of the other very popular science books about humans that are usually not done by anthropologists. I think they
Yeah.
really give short shrift to the complexity of evolutionary processes, but especially to the complexity in human evolution.
Yeah, I agree. A writer that I recently podcasted with, it was maybe a month or 2 ago now, I think did a really good job of sort of couching this feminist argument. Richard Prum, who writes,
Uh
he's a
huh.
bird researcher, and his newest book is The Evolution of Beauty, and he really talks about driving forces for evolution not always being fitness, but sometimes just being aesthetics.
Yeah. Yeah.
How important the aesthetic driving force really is, and so much of that has to do with the female of the species being the central arbiter of basically the path and the direction of evolution.
Right.
Like, that's a
Right.
lot of responsibility there.
Yeah, and that's major in birds and a lot of avian
Yeah,
systems, and yet that's never what's sort of highlighted, right? It is by a bird
exactly.
researcher, but that yeah. So the aesthetics thing I think is fascinating because, and
Mhm.
I in the chapter on art in the Creative Spark, I talk a little bit about this idea that I have based on more anecdotal research, not I'm long term hardcore because it's just not very common the data,
Mhm.
but the idea that there might be something about aesthetics that we share with other primates or other social mammals, maybe even birds. I think that's really interesting because I think there's some deep connections in the world of aesthetics, of beauty, and of engaging. And I have a couple examples when we were doing the critter cam work with the HD cameras on the monkeys. We'd be reviewing the footage, and they'd be off, and this female would stop and sort of sit down, and she would frame. And this was on the Rock of Gibraltar, right? So she framed. Her face was looking out over across the Strait of Gibraltar and could see Africa in the distance, and it was just gorgeous. And we were reviewing the footage, like, oh my God, this is great. Then she shifted just slightly, and all of us just like had our breath taken away. It was the most beautiful frame we had ever seen, and she sat there for 6 minutes
Oh,
just watching.
wow.
And we have about 5 instances of that on the cameras, and I've seen this in the field with a couple different primate species. I don't know what it means. I have no idea, but it's really interesting. That'd be a great area for future study.
Absolutely, that's incredible. This new book, The Creative Spark: How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional, this is actually your second book, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's my second single authored book. Yeah.
And so the other book you wrote, Race and Monogamy and the Other Lies They Told You, does touch on exactly some of these themes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so race, monogamy, and other lies I told you, and the subtitle is "Busting Myths About Human Nature."
Mhm.
Really was the my core contribution early on to sort of saying, "Hey, we know a lot about sex, we know a lot about aggression, right, and we know a lot about sort of the ways in which humans put together race and racism?
Mm-hmm.
What are the data? And so that's what the book is about. It's just trying to get the data from multiple fields into the public for access, because there's so many myths, there's so many misconceptions about sex, about aggression, and about race that are damaging to our society. And throughout this book, the new one, The Creative Spark, I also infused a lot of those themes to try to drive home the point. The way we think the world is, the nature of the world is largely wrong in many of these cases when it comes to sex, to art, to religion, even to science. People think science is something that's really, really recent. And some parts of it are, but there's really deep, deep roots to our fascinating curiosity and our sense of experimentation.
Absolutely. You, sir, I have to say, are a skeptic after my own heart. And I appreciate that deeply. This idea of reminding people of their cognitive biases, of their own anecdotal experiences, of the Dunning-Kruger effect, of all of these
Yeah.
reasons that we think we know things because they're reinforced societally by specific driving forces, agenda driven forces, marketing forces, political forces that ultimately are not proper reflections of reality, and that having a science-based worldview, I think, can really in many ways reinforce and fight against some of these pernicious myths that we allow to, like, I myself deep down can be sexist. I'm a woman and I still, carry around because they're so infused. They're
Right.
almost impossible to walk away from. And we're all speciesist and we're all ageist
Yeah.
and there's a
Yeah.
tribalism in us and all these things that I think the more we know, the more well-rounded and the less biased we can become. So the great thing is this book works on so many levels. I think it taps into some of these basic human themes that are really important. It's like we can't reinforce them enough. But also there's so much new information that I think people who are interested in science but aren't necessarily expert in science, it's
Uh-huh.
a very it's an easy read and it's an enjoyable read, and definitely it'll fill you with the types of things that you can share at your next cocktail party, which I think is really fun for a lot of people when they dive deep into a book like this. So I have to say I fully appreciate that. I also have to thank you for taking so much time out of your day. I don't know if you know, but we've been going almost an hour.
Oh, wow.
I know
Yeah.
it flies by, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hopefully, I can keep you for just a couple more minutes to ask you the two closing questions that I ask
Okay.
everybody who's on my podcast.
Yes,
Also,
absolutely.
where are you hailing from right now? Because the birds are just beautiful in the
Oh,
background.
sorry.
No, I love it.
I'm sitting on the porch. We have a place in Cleveland, Ohio, and
Oh.
so I'm sitting on the back porch there, surrounded by birds and squirrels and all
Ah,
sorts of beautiful
I know.
stuff.
I
Yeah,
just
it's really
hear the
nice.
nature. It's like alive where you're coming from, which is not always
Yeah.
the case in the big city. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Okay, so here come the final two questions that I ask everybody on the podcast, and they are. In whatever context is relevant to you right now, it could be your own personal life, it could be the future of your work, it could be the future of humanity as a whole. Obviously, you maintain some of those perspectives probably more often than some other individuals do in their work. But whatever perspective or context is relevant to you, the first question is when you think about the future, what is the most worrisome, the most disconcerting? What keeps you up at night? What, gets to you? But on the flip side of that, so that we end on a positive note, what are you most hopeful and optimistic about? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, those are difficult questions.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what really really bothers me now, given the current context that we find ourselves in this country and the world, is the radical increases in inequality globally and locally. The ways in which unequal access are changing the bodies, the lives, and the
Mm-hmm.
minds of the people we live with and around. That was a loud
That's
plane.
okay.
This whole idea of inequality, it's been with us for tens of thousands of years, but it's
Yeah.
been ratcheting up so dramatically recently. Even in the last 100 years, the last 50 years, it's changed so much, and it's inequality in race, sex, gender, education, finances,
Yeah.
access to, and so this big giant gap and the increasing gap where fewer and fewer have more and more have less and less.
And this
That's a
sense of
big problem,
fairness is kind of going out the window. Like, there's always
right?
been inequality, but there's still been a maintenance of a sense of fairness amongst the individuals, and that's slowly being eroded.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's being helped along the way by the current situation in the United States government. The
Absolutely.
idea of this kind of just aggressive bullying and pushing, this idea that you don't compromise or connect or cooperate, you just force things through.
Yeah, and you
That's
never apologize, right?
that's
It's
that
like, ugh.
we know from the history of humanity that that doesn't work. So that's my big concern, inequality, because I think it's really damaging to the bodies and lives of humans around the planet.
Mhm.
So, my optimistic flip side to that is I have spent a long time studying the history of humanity, what we do, and how many crises we have somehow found our way out of. We really shouldn't be here. We are unbelievably lucky, but also unbelievably good at figuring out, imagining a solution to the absolute most life threatening and complex realities. And so we are now faced with a tipping point of inequality, a tipping point of sort of massive ecosystems change on a global scale. There's so many challenges out there. There's so much stacked against us. But for the last 2 million years, we and our ancestors have been working together, thinking together, imagining possible worlds and making them happen. And I think we have it in us to do this today. It's just a matter of getting together and trying to make it happen. We might fail, but at least we'll never know if we don't try. And I think we can.
Absolutely. We can use that cooperative spirit that's been so fundamental to getting us to where we are today. It'll carry us through the future. I mean, I know we can do it. It's just a function of having the willpower to do
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But so I remain optimistic in spite of the multiple great reasons to be a pessimist.
I, I feel you. And you know what? All I got to say about that is term limits. You gotta love them. Well, Augustine, this was so much fun. One more time, I want to tell everybody you should pick up, it's available now, The Creative Spark, How Imagination Made Humans Exceptional, wherever books are sold. And on top of that, are you active on social media? Is there a place where
Yes,
individuals can connect?
absolutely. So I'm now quite active on Twitter at AnthroFuentes. So shoot me a link, send me something interesting. I'll send you stuff back. I've got a web page and a Facebook page. So I give lots of public talks. And if you're interested in contacting me, shoot me an email at afuentes@nd.edu. I love questions, especially if you have some comments about the book.
Excellent. Well, I got to thank you one more time for joining me. This was a wonderful chat.
I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.